Hey, Jesse.
Hey, Tony. Yeah, we could have made the movie just about Chasten, I think.
I have to say, Casten's got quite a following. It's great to be here on stage with you in person, not doing a Zoom, as much as I have enjoyed doing those for the last 2 years. It's great to be here with another Bay Area native. Can I just ask you, is the Castro one of those kind of formative theaters for you, like it is for me?
I know, absolutely. I think I mentioned that my father lives on Liberty Street and we used to come down here and watch movies. I can remember seeing a double feature of Errol Morris's Gates of Heaven and Ernie Fasalius's Hardware Wars, if anybody in the audience knows those movies. So that was like my cinematic education right here in Castro. And I love it. So thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. And very special to be in the theater. You know, we shot the movie on the road, COVID hit. We were in an edit room in isolation for a year and didn't know if any of the jokes worked. So it's just great to hear people laughing, actually.
So let's start with the question I love asking every documentary filmmaker. When did you know that this was a film? What was the moment where you said, I gotta get in there?
Yeah, actually I said no when I was asked to make the film too. I didn't think there was a film here. But my producers, John Barton and Dan Cogan, said, check out this town hall that he just did. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting, but he's the mayor of South Bend, he's gonna go nowhere. And I said, is this access that you're talking about, is this for real? And he said, we think so. I said, well, let's check it out. Because I love the idea that we could make a film about someone running for president, but have access to him, which I've not really seen much of it before. There's a couple of films that have interesting access, but I was curious, like, what's it like to be a human being and run for president? So we just started shooting, and fortunately, Pete took off really quickly.
This could have been a much shorter movie, I guess.
Yeah. The way I told myself it's development, and that way it wasn't too much pressure. And actually, the access was for real. I mean, the stakes were really low at that point. We started shooting in March of 2019. Pete had a staff of 4. I think, well, he probably thought he was going to win, but no one else did. And I was more surprised when his campaign took off, which is really in May and June of 2019 that he allowed us to continue to shoot. But he was true to his commitment, and we had made it clear to him that he would have no control over the film. That was a condition of our relationship together, that we would make the film we wanted to make.
So yeah, that was going to be my next question. Were there areas that were off limits to you as a filmmaker and your team? Were there any hard no's from the campaign?
Before I answer that question, can I'm a little delirious being in this magical space, and I want to acknowledge one person in the room tonight who's my partner and my producer, my co-conspirator, my wife Amanda McBain, who helped go on this journey with me. Amanda, please thank Michelle. Very hard journey on this film, and really made by Amanda, myself, and our editor, Jeff Gilbert. You were saying, was anything really off limits?
Yeah.
No. We got to shoot all of Debate Prep, which I couldn't believe. I mean, Pete never, there would be scenes like where Chasten talks to Pete about his very painful Victory Fund address where he talks about being closeted. And in that scene, they allowed me to film. It's one of the first things I ever saw filmed of the two of them together. And I was like, oh my God, they're letting me film this. This is incredibly intimate. It's their marriage, they're working this stuff out. Like, there's a movie here if like they continue to allow me to be in the room. At some point, they did say, well, would you give us some privacy? There's no one else in the room. And so there was that kind of, hey, could you back off now? But not like you can't come in the room. It's like you can come in the room, you just gotta leave the room when we tell you to leave. And I think that in documentary work, it's really about recognizing what those boundaries are. It doesn't mean you don't push and be a little obnoxious or like pretend you didn't hear and keep shooting and say like, well, I gotta get a wide shot, which is what I did when they told me to leave. But
is there a safe word?
Yeah. Debate, I got kicked off the bus in Iowa by Liz Smith. That was just more like being mean and like access. And Debate Prep, though, we shot all of it. There was a lot of it.
It is I don't want to say it's brutal, but they were truth tellers to their candidates. There was a lot of honesty there. The Tin Woodsman comment I thought was especially harsh, perhaps.
Yeah, like very much like therapy, I thought. Much more interesting than the tactical, political stuff. And I couldn't believe how blunt Liz was. I think, to Pete's credit, he brought her in because he knew she was the only person who would speak to him that way. And I just thought it was so, I mean, the value of what those interactions didn't fully emerge until we were cutting the film and sort of trying to understand what this movie is really about. Pete's own journey through the story, which I think is framed well by Chaston at the top of the film. Right? You know, he asked that question, is to be able to be his true self, his authentic self, and this process of running for president is such an inhuman process. And I think that the work that he has to do on himself, that Liz helps him do, that Chaston tries to help him do to kind of access that emotional self that's so guarded. I mean, those interactions in the big rep they were painful, they felt real, they were hard. I mean, those are the moments that found their way in.
That leads perfectly into another question. Secretary Buttigieg is often accused of being very guarded, of having a bit of a defensive wall, lacking authenticity sometimes. It is maybe a high-achieving gay personality type, especially for people that are closeted into adulthood, that I think many of us in the LGBT community might be able to recognize. Was that a challenge for you as a filmmaker? I would imagine, like being a journalist, it helps if people are a little effusive and want to open up to you. Did you have any tricks of the trade, any ways that you drew him out of himself during those interviews? Because I feel like you do get quite a lot out of him, more than I've seen in many other interviews.
Yeah, Pete's a paradox of a documentary subject. He's clearly so comfortable in front of the camera in some ways, and in other ways the most difficult kind of documentary subject. And that his control is kind of the enemy of documentary, at least the kinds of films that I like to make. Where you want subjects who are emotionally demonstrative, who lose control, or sort of vulnerable. And I sometimes feel like. If I can be frank, like Pete's kind of a bad actor, and what I mean by that is like he's just, I think as a director trying to kind of understand and sort of get past his defenses, I felt like I guess I felt like I had a good actor, but I couldn't get a good performance out of him. I guess what I should say, and that sounds maybe reductive, but I think one of the strategies that I adopted, and you see it in the film, out of frustration, and part of this is that Pete was doing so much press, and we had a different relationship. That I didn't fall into the traditional press category. Also, I wasn't campaign stuff. I was in this like nether world, but he would slip so easily into like press speak, and I found it so unrevealing that I enlisted Chaston. Just said, Chaston, ask Pete questions, and it became quickly much more a conversation between the two of them about their relationship. And I was like, okay, this is interesting, and that was a technique that, I mean, in many ways, Chaston became an advocate for me in the filmmaking process, also off screen, and some of the access came from Chaston, understanding what we were trying to do, and just being an easier person to connect with. I was struggling with the film. I'm like, what is this story? I couldn't get access to this guy. And then I met Chaston, and we talked about that scene I shot with the two of them talking. But I was just like, oh, okay, it's like their relationship is like way more interesting to me than whatever's happening in Iowa. And I think part of the journey that we were on was figuring out like how much politics and how much relationship this film needed to be about.
I feel like the relationship is so at the center of this, which for me as a gay man was extraordinary to see. Not only a candidate, but a candidate for the presidency, openly gay, affectionate to his husband. It made me wonder to a degree, watching this film, whether or not sort of the Mayor Pete persona was in a way a defense mechanism, was a very necessary part of public life that people have to have access to put on in order to protect themselves. Did you draw any conclusions about sort of the, I don't know, I want to say maybe political persona aspect of being Mayor Pete?
Absolutely, yeah, that's like, that question's so central to the project of this film, and sort of understanding like how much of Pete's presentation is a kind of conscious construction and how much is rooted in kind of his real self, right? And like, I loved watching him work as mayor. I found it so much more grounding than double campaigns, which to me was like, you know, Pete playing a presidential candidate as opposed to actually being mayor. And yeah, there is a kind of hokey, small town flavor, which he's certainly kind of aware of and plays into. I mean, it's also part of being mayor. You cut the ribbon at the fire station, and then, well, there might be a crisis to a police shooting. You got to deal with it and sort of throw the script out. And I think, you know, fortunately the film, I mean, it opens with this sort of pictured postcard Mayor Pete who turned around South Bend, but then you quickly confront the reality sort of beneath the surface, which is there are real problems there too. And I think that, I mean, I don't know that we kind of fully cracked open the Mayor Pete persona, but I think that it's just complicated. I mean, there are dimensions to it, and you know, I mean, I love when Chasten asks him the question, like, how do you know how to do what you're doing? He sort of played the part on a small scale, and now he's just playing it on a bigger stage, and he can kind of fake it, and do it too, clearly, quite well.
Chasten is such an interesting character in this. I had the pleasure of interviewing him last year, I believe 3 days after Amy Coney Barrett was elected onto the Supreme Court. We had quite the conversation that week. It was wonderful to see that the Chasten that I got to speak to privately and that I then spoke to for this public interview via Zoom was very much the Chasten that I saw in this documentary. And I remembered as I was watching tonight that he is somebody with not only an educational background, but a theater background. How much do you feel like he was sort of relishing getting to do the public part of the role of being a candidate's spouse? I mean, he looks enthusiastic.
He's a natural politician in ways that are totally unlike the ways that Pete's a natural politician. And I loved, for example, Gay Camp in Iowa, one of the early scenes I shot with Chasten, I just said, I want to go on the trail with you. And I recognized that he was, first of all, he was becoming a national figure and also becoming a politician, and had just, each of them were sort of working out and growing in their own ways and doing things together, and also, you know, Chasten's identity as a gay man is very different than Pete's. I mean, and these things were getting worked out publicly, but also privately, and so I did, actually my producers were like, I don't know, they were very pushed back on like my interest in Chasten, and I was like, no, but I can't make this film. I have to go through Chasten to get to Pete. Like, otherwise, like, that's how I connect. I'm connecting emotionally with the stories. I'm connecting with Chasten, and as I said, you know, Chasten really helped us get to Pete. I don't think we've unraveled fully the mystery of Pete, and I'll leave that to others to continue the work.
Or a sequel, Secretary Pete.
Yeah. As I said, I'll leave that to others, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, I'm swearing off political campaigns.
Who's more guarded in interview, Pete or Burt Reynolds?
Burt was, you know, Burt's an act too. I mean, Burt plays a movie star, actually, but had a kind of sweet vulnerability that wasn't far beneath the surface. And I don't know. I wonder. There's another Pete, you know, that I didn't see. Peter, his closest friends call him Peter, and I feel like I never saw Peter.
I noticed that when I interviewed Chasten, that he referred to Peter, and it took me a second to realize he meant his husband.
Yeah.
I love that he said at one point that it would not be authentic for him to be suddenly a more effusive person, that you know, authenticity for him was being a little bit guarded.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's this exquisite dilemma that he's in. He needs to be more emotional to access that guarded part of himself. I mean, I love, he talks about mastering his emotions, you know, sort of admirable, but also, you know, maybe he needs less mastery, and that's a hard position to be in. And, you know, he finds himself in this campaign to like suddenly share that with millions of people. And I mean, I did notice that the best debate moments were not the scripted moments. I mean, there were scripted moments, but the vulnerability that he was able to access, tap into, those weren't moments that I ever saw in debate prep. I think he just found a way, and I think he grew. I mean, he's 37 when he ran for president. I think he'd come out at 33. It was a kind of coming of age for him. I think he put himself in this. I mean, this is a bit of analysis that I'm not qualified to do, but I mean, he sort of threw himself into the most public kind of self-exposure and invited a filmmaker to follow him around and needle him. And I don't, you know, I guess to his credit.
It's an incredible act of bravery, I think. I mean, essentially, he is a baby gay, having only come out at 33. I want to ask you about that specifically. You are an openly heterosexual filmmaker.
True.
What was it like delving into this project? Do you have LGBTQ collaborators that you look to for maybe some of the community stuff that's just not necessarily in your immediate wheelhouse? I also know that you are a native Bay Area and are here in San Francisco, so it's not like this is a foreign subject by any means. But did you look to people for a little bit of guidance on some of those questions?
I don't know if I have good gay cred or not, to be honest. I'm a straight man. Our core team, Jeff and Amanda, we're all straight. I mean, I do ask myself sometimes, like, what a gay filmmaker, queer filmmaker, like, how would they have told the story differently? How would they have related to me differently? And of course, that's not what happened. I think for me, first of all, I've always wanted to do documentary work about people who just weren't like me, whether they were politically conservative or, you know, I've always felt comfortable in making that journey, but I think that's gotten to be more fraught in sort of the kinds of journeys you can make to tell those stories, and certainly those have been more about politically conservative cultures and not. But I found, like, actually in doing that, making a film called The Overnighters, which came out about 6 or 7 years ago. It's about a Lutheran pastor who's closeted. And the film, he comes out. It's the first film about gay identity or gay themes that I ever made. And it put me on a path to some other work, a series called The Family for Netflix, which is about a...
That's just amazing, by the way. Looking at your credits, I saw that and I was like, whoa, what the filmmaker who did The Family?
It's kind of a crazy story, but part of it is about this very conservative, fundamentalist Christian organization, very secretive, and they work around the world with allies to promote really policies that are repressive to folks in the queer community. And the film unpacks some of their kind of secret agenda. And then I produced Gay Tours Due South, which is a film about San Francisco gay men's tourists. So you know, it's been part of the work that I've been doing, and I think it's the journey that I'm on. And you know, certainly invited friends to look at the work who can, you know, have different perspectives, and I think that was valuable.
I think you're very queer fluent, if I may say so.
I don't know. I mean, you know, an ally, and I just. But I think, yeah. What do you think? Like, how would a queer filmmaker have made a different movie here? Can you answer that?
Who's the interviewer here?
I know it's
you are too professionally. I shouldn't say that.
Maybe like more sort of comforting. I mean, I do question my ability to kind of go directly at some. I'm kind of like a polite, standoffish kind of person. Like Pete, we're like a bad combination, you and Pete, because we're both kind of reserved. That's why me and Chastity hit it off. Like, my wife and me, like, we're opposites kind of. And so me and Pete are like oil and water.
Oil and oil.
Oil and oil.
I mean, it's a world that I'm in too. I interview people that do not come from my background, that do not have part of my experience. It's a question that I grapple with in order to be the most empathetic and tell the best stories. I think it's obvious you also do. I want to talk about the night in South Bend, the town hall. the Eric Logan Town Hall. That was, I would say, one of the more difficult, more riveting sections to watch because I think he was so uncomfortable in it, because he was having to answer some very uncomfortable, very big questions. Can you just take me back to that night? What was your experience there in that room?
I mean, it really kind of ripped the surface off the narrative of the South Bend turnaround, and I think it exposed the fault line that's been there that we saw further exposed when the film wrapped in, as I said, in early March 2020, and shortly before the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. But I was watching Pete, first of all, deal with that crisis, have no playbook to deal with it, and then sort of have to learn how to talk about these issues as a candidate, and make mistakes. I mean, it could have been. I actually did a lot of work after that shooting in South Bend as he worked to restore trust with the people in that community, and I found that to be really kind of the hard work of governing, unlike the campaign narrative. But it was like another film, and Pete was not, he would spend a lot of time listening, actually. And it's one of the things I noticed about Pete when we first started filming, and he was doing very small events, which I loved because there was no press there, and they were just conversations, and he would listen, and sometimes he would talk, but it was clear that he wasn't a guy who needed to hear the sound of his own voice, which was not sort of what I imagined somehow. I mean, I think that's why that scene in the church in Dallas, where he's confronted again about being a white candidate. I think that is the issue of the party. I think of the country to some extent. And I feel like it's an important dimension of this story, and it's not just Pete's story. It's like any white candidate in the Democratic Party who's going to knit together these fractious constituencies, and how are they going to do that? And I think you see Pete learn, like the way he talks about his identity and lived experience, and why he thinks he can connect with African American voters. He learns it's not the language or the way in which he has to make an adjustment. And I think part of that comes out of just reckoning with the pain in his community, and then just watching the landscape of the country shift. Sorry, that's a long answer, but
it was a big question.
It is a big question.
So the timing on the release on this is really interesting. Secretary Buttigieg is back in the news over the subject of paternity leave. He's a new father. He and Chaston are both new fathers.
I thought you were going to talk about infrastructure, but yeah.
Well, infrastructure is important too. It has been very interesting to see the blowback that he's gotten for doing something that I didn't realize was quite as controversial. Also, his new parents, I'm sure they're really busy. Do you know if they've seen the film?
Oh yeah, I shared it with them a year ago. It wasn't quite done, but and actually Pete saw successive cuts, and Chaston just texted me 3 days ago because there was an article in Politico about the film, which is pretty good, and I think he read it. So they've just adopted 2 children, infants, and Pete took paternity leave, if you missed that, and that created a controversy and there was a lot of kind of both overt and like veiled homophobia, I think, and the controversy.
Oh yeah, not so veiled. I
Yeah.
would say. This is where I'm going to use my gay authority to say it was not so veiled.
Yeah. But they just really resurfaced after Pete came back to work, and there was some health issues with one of their children, and so Pete's back in the news, and infrastructure passed, and Chaston was like, hey, can you send me the film again? I want to check it. They've seen it, but I think they were probably wondering if it had changed, which it hasn't. And actually, Pete and I we've had a long conversation about the movie, and I'll say that in his version of the story, there's a lot more policy and maybe less.
I'm not terribly surprised to hear you say that. I feel like policy is sort of his thing.
I think Chaston wanted more screen time for himself.
Maybe the sequel is Chaston. Chaston is quite the story. I read his book. I've also interviewed him. I think that if not you, some other filmmaker could do a Chaston.
I sometimes wish I had the courage of my convictions and like kind of fully went that direction. He was like a peripheral character. But he's the guy who maybe would be president someday, so
Not dead yet, it could happen. So what's next for you?
I'll take a break from politics if I can. I mean, it's hard given the moment, I think, to disengage. But I made 2 campaign films back to back. One was about teenage boys running for fake office, and one was about Pete. And I think Amanda and I need to direct our energies into something non-political for at least one film before we go back to politics.
Can you say that now?
I know we were kicking around one idea, which was great and very different, but I don't think it's makeable. And I think the access is kind of murder. So I can't go back to Iowa for like at least a decade. The trauma does.
Jesse, thank you so
Tony,
much.
thank you. Thank you guys so much for that.